Imagine for a second that um, the sky actually cracks open. Like we're talking about the arrival of a world-altering savior or, a profound sage figure.
Right.
What ancient Eastern prophecy refers to as the emergence of the Ziwei star. Usually when humanity collectively pictures something like this, we default to the easiest, I guess, most cinematic version of events.
Yeah, the Hollywood version.
Exactly. We imagine a sudden, spontaneous miracle, the clouds part, the trumpets sound, and poof, there they are, fully formed and ready to fix everything that is just fundamentally broken in our society.
We completely gravitate toward that instantaneous version because, well, it absolves us of the friction of reality. An overnight shift in the fabric of the world it's a comforting myth.
It really is.
It implies that profound change is just something that happens to us, right? Rather than something that has to be painstakingly, like brutally engineered.
But what if that comforting myth is just completely backwards?
Right.
What if instead of a sudden magical manifestation, the emergence of a true world-shifting figure follows a strict, grueling, and highly specific 5-year timetable?
I mean, that framing completely changes the dynamic of what a savior actually is. It pulls the whole concept out of the realm of pure fantasy and forces it into a deeply human, step-by-step process of psychological and, frankly, material preparation.
Yeah.
It tells us that true transformation, even on a supposedly divine scale, requires an unimaginable amount of heavy lifting in the dark.
It really does, and that is exactly what we are getting into today. So welcome to this deep dive. Our mission for you today is to decode a highly specific, timeline-based set of source materials we've gathered.
Right.
We're analyzing a really fascinating tarot reading that maps out the predicted rise of the Zenith star, tracking it year by year from 2022 to 2026.
And we definitely need to talk about the specific tool being used to map this out because it creates an incredible thematic friction.
Oh, absolutely.
The timeline isn't using a standard gentle deck. It's using the Runic tarot. And this is a deck deeply steeped in Norse mythology, Viking imagery, and the harsh realities of Northern European survival.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, that sounds like a massive contradiction. We have the Ziwei star, which comes from Chinese purple star astrology.
Right, which is very structured.
Exactly. It's a concept usually associated with cosmic harmony, celestial bureaucracy, and a sort of elegant predestined order. But we are looking at this Eastern concept through a lens forged in, well, ice, iron, and blood.
And that friction is exactly why this reading is so compelling. I mean, Eastern prophecies often lean toward eventual harmony, but the Runic tarot demands sacrifice. It operates on the logic of harsh winters and violent transitions.
Yeah, it's not a gentle process.
Not at all. Mixing these two systems tells us that this figure's emergence isn't going to be a peaceful descent from the heavens. It is going to be a heavy, potentially violent, and deeply grounded struggle.
Which is why, if you are listening to this and thinking, it's just tarot cards, I want you to look at this strictly as a psychological and strategic blueprint.
Exactly.
We are going to do an analytical breakdown of how a theoretical world-shifting figure actually prepares for the spotlight. The psychology, the resources, the sheer weight of what it takes to dismantle an old world and step onto the stage of a new one.
It's a massive undertaking.
So to start this chronological journey, we have to rewind. We have to take you back to 2022 because according to this timeline, that is where the agonizing mental groundwork for this grand emergence actually began.
Yeah. 2022 is the absolute starting point of this 5-year window.
Yeah.
And the card drawn for this inaugural year is the Two of Swords, specifically in the reversed position.
Okay, so reverse.
Yeah, and to grasp the gravity of the reversal, you really have to visualize the card when it's upright. The traditional Two of Swords depicts a figure sitting alone, wearing a tight blindfold, holding two heavy swords crossed defensively over their own chest.
Like they're blocking everything out.
Exactly. It represents a willful stalemate. It's about self-closure, actively resisting an uncomfortable truth, shutting the world out, and just refusing to make a critical decision.
But our source points out that for 2022, this card is reversed. And that completely shatters the stalemate.
Wait, so a reversed card implies a disruption of that state? Like the blindfold isn't just peacefully slipping off, it's being forcefully ripped away?
Yeah, exactly the opposite of peaceful. The source text describes this reverse state as a moment where chaos first opens and the grand deception is lifted.
Wow.
2022 was not the year this figure stepped out to wave at the public. It was the year of a violent internal awakening. It represents a terrifying moment of cognitive dissonance where this individual, whoever they are, went through an intense inner reckoning.
Like they couldn't ignore it anymore.
Right. They finally realized The delusion is over. I can no longer hide from what I am supposed to do.
It makes me think of that visceral, iconic moment in The Matrix. It's like Neo waking up in the pod, covered in that gel, realizing his entire life was a simulation.
That is a perfect analogy. It is decidedly not glamorous. The blindfold comes off, the truth of the world's brokenness is glaring and horrifying, and the inner struggle of trying to stay asleep is finally over. He accepts his brutal reality, even though he is still entirely hidden deep underground, completely unseen by the rest of the world.
Yeah, he's literally unplugged, but nobody walking down the street has any idea.
Right.
The psychological terror of that moment just cannot be overstated. The mental barricades have fallen. The crucial, agonizing decision to face reality has been made. But as you pointed out, this is an entirely internal earthquake.
So nobody else sees it.
Nobody.
Okay.
In 2022, the world sees absolutely nothing. The Ziwei star is completely concealed, just dealing with the shockwaves of their own awakening and the crushing burden of their newly accepted destiny.
Okay, so the blindfold is off, the delusion is gone. You accept you have a massive role to play, but you can't feed a global movement on enlightenment alone.
Definitely not.
The moment you accept reality, you probably look around and realize how massively under-resourced you are to actually change it. That's the brutal realization that forces the transition into the next phase.
Which brings us to the card for 2023. The King of Pentacles, upright.
What's fascinating here is the sheer contradiction to our typical expectations of a spiritual leader or, a savior.
Oh, totally.
When we think of a sage, we think of ethereal wisdom, poverty, disciples on a mountaintop. But the King of Pentacles is deeply rooted in the earth element. It represents extreme practicality, vast wealth, systemic stability, and absolute mastery over physical, tangible resources.
And the source material literally calls this phase bottom building.
Yeah, it is the ultimate pragmatic pivot. You do not build a new world order on good vibes and philosophy alone. In 2023, the energy shifts dramatically from the internal mind to the external material plane.
So they're getting to work. Exactly. The text explicitly notes that this figure is not rushing to a podium to show off their divinity or their leadership. Instead, they are quietly and perhaps ruthlessly focused on mastering the material world.
Let's talk about the actual mechanics of that. How does a sage do this? They are amassing wealth. They are forging strategic networks. They are securing a rock-solid material foundation.
It's all about infrastructure.
Right. It's so hyper-pragmatic, it almost feels unspiritual. But structurally, it makes total sense. If you are going to challenge the massive, entrenched power structures of the existing world, you need capital.
Yeah.
You need physical infrastructure. You need lawyers. You need secure communications. You need land.
We need a war chest.
Exactly. You cannot start a global paradigm shift if you can't pay the server bills.
And it highlights a deep, often uncomfortable truth about lasting historical change. The spiritual ambition and the material capability have to perfectly align. By embodying the King of Pentacles energy in 2023, this figure is ensuring they won't simply be crushed by the existing powers the moment they step out of line. They are silently, meticulously building an impenetrable fortress. They are securing the vast physical resources required to sustain the immense pressure of what they know is coming next.
Okay, so let's track the causality here. In 2022, the mind is violently awakened and the destiny is accepted. In 2023, the physical resources and the material fortress are ruthlessly secured.
Right.
The figure now has the infrastructure and the capital required to actually hold and project power. The foundation is poured. This leads us right into the year 2024. And the energy of the tarot shifts massively again.
A huge shift.
Yeah, we move away from the day-to-day suit cards and enter the heavy archetypal energy of the major arcana. The card is the Emperor, upright.
The Emperor is a heavyweight card, arguably the most structurally imposing in the entire deck. It represents a massive shift toward rigid structure, absolute control, and systemic order.
So it's about power.
Pure power. The source text marks 2024 as a critical, definitive node in this timeline. This is the year the figure's status is established. It represents a formal ascension, a coronation.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. I'm stuck on something here, though. You're calling 2024 the year of the Emperor, the ultimate symbol of authority, rule, and absolute power. But earlier, the source said this person is still totally hidden from the public eye.
Yeah, they are.
How can you be an emperor of a new world order if nobody even knows your name? The source specifically notes that their image might still carry a serious, difficult-to-approach distance.
Yeah.
That feels incredibly contradictory.
Yeah.
If they've had a coronation, shouldn't they be on every screen in the world?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how global power actually operates, it isn't contradictory at all. Think about how the world's most profound systemic shifts actually occur.
Okay.
They rarely start with a flashy press conference or a public parade. 2024 is an internal, behind-the-scenes coronation. The emperor represents the establishment of a new Tao or a new underlying systemic order.
Like setting the rules of the game.
Exactly. The source is suggesting that the global situation, the actual mechanics of world power, might already be secretly reorganizing itself around this figure's hidden gravity.
Ah, so true authority doesn't actually require public validation to start manipulating reality. The public is the last to know when the tectonic plates have already shifted beneath them.
Precisely. The emperor doesn't need the average person on the street to know he's the emperor in order to pull the absolute levers of power.
Wow.
In 2024, this figure has fully stepped into their authority within their specific, highly influential circles or networks. They are the ones dictating the new terms of reality from the shadows, and they maintain that serious, unapproachable distance specifically to preserve their operational security.
Because if they step out too soon, they're a target.
Exactly. They are entirely focused on the structural integrity of this new order. They are the architect locked inside the control room, surrounded by the resources they built in 2023.
So the timeline so far is incredibly tight, incredibly logical. Mental breakthrough in 2022, material foundation in 2023, and then the assumption of hidden architectural control in 2024.
Right.
It sounds like the journey is functionally complete. They have the money, they have the power, they have the systemic control. But they are still hidden inside that fortress. Here's the massive gap we have to cross. How does someone who has spent years fortifying themselves in the dark, acting as a hidden, unapproachable emperor, suddenly become the universally recognized, radiant Ziwei star?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right? Like, why would they ever leave the safety of the control room?
This is exactly where the specific imagery of the Runic tarot provides a profound, almost terrifying insight, and it brings us to the pivotal year of 2025.
Right, 2025. The card drawn is the Four of Wands, upright. Now, if you know traditional Rider-Waite tarot, the Four of Wands is universally known as a very happy, stable card.
Yeah, very celebratory.
It usually depicts a peaceful celebration, a wedding canopy, a joyous homecoming. But here's where we hit that thematic friction you mentioned earlier. The source points out a striking, violent detail. In the Runic tarot deck, the imagery for this exact same card is completely different.
It's totally inverted in tone.
It depicts a blazing, burning Viking ship on the water.
This raises an important question about the fundamental nature of stepping into the public eye as a genuine savior figure, rather than just another tyrant. Why replace a peaceful wedding canopy with a burning ship?
It's so intense.
In Norse culture, a burning ship adrift on the water is a funeral pyre. It is the ultimate, irreversible ritual of passage from one state of being to another. You do not return from a burning ship.
And the source explicitly calls this a ritual transformation and a definitive farewell to the old self.
Let's break down the psychological mechanics of why this is absolutely necessary. This figure has just spent 2023 and 2024 building immense, rigid power as the emperor. They have amassed wealth, built fortresses, and exercised absolute serious, structured control. But holding that kind of power invariably creates an ego. It creates a hardened, defensive shell. You cannot truly connect with the mass of humanity. You cannot be a beacon of universal warmth and hope if you remain locked inside the cold, paranoid armor of the emperor.
So the armor has to burn. The hidden emperor essentially has to die, metaphorically speaking, to give birth to the sage.
It is mandatory. Before facing the masses, the sage must intentionally undergo a grand baptism by fire. It's a funeral pyre for the living.
That's such a heavy concept.
The rigid, old structure of the self, perhaps even the very secretive networks, the immense wealth, and the ruthless methods they use to build their power in the first place must be violently and intentionally stripped away. Think about the psychological terror of that.
Giving up everything you just spent years building.
They have to willingly set fire to the ship that brought them this far. They have to embrace a staggering level of public vulnerability.
I am obsessed with that phrase, a funeral pyre for the living. What does that actually look like in practice? How do you burn your own ego on a global stage? The source has this really key detail about 2025. It says the public will absolutely see the fire.
Yes.
They will see the undeniable signal of this massive transformation. But because of the smoke, they still won't completely see the person standing at the center of the flames.
The smoke of the burning ship obscures the architect. The world will inevitably feel the immense heat of this transition. They might see old systems suddenly catching fire, massive institutions or paradigms collapsing in on themselves.
Like society-wide upheaval.
Exactly. This macro-level chaos is just a reflection of the figure's intense internal ritual playing out on the world stage. People will intuitively know that an old era is concluding, but the true identity of the person orchestrating this shift remains shrouded in the thick smoke of their own intentional ego death.
It's the ultimate crucible. You can't fake a burning Viking ship. You can't half commit to a funeral pyre. You either survive the absolute destruction of your old ego and are reborn, or you are entirely consumed by the flames and forgotten.
Right. There is no in between.
Which means that only after the ego, the secrecy, the wealth hoarding, and the rigid control are reduced to pure ashes in 2025 can the pure, unshadowed light finally be revealed. And that brings us finally to the end of the timeline, 2026.
2026 is represented by the major arcana card, the Sun upright. As the source material enthusiastically notes, this is universally considered the absolute best, most brilliant, and positive card in the entire deck.
It represents pure joy, vital energy, profound hope, and most importantly, unobscured truth. This is the climax of the 5-year prophecy.
It is the moment of arrival. This is the definitive public revelation, or as the Eastern philosophical term in the source puts it, the chushi, the act of fully stepping out into the world. Think about the incredible contrast of this journey. After the intense, agonizing, solitary awakening in the dark in 2022, the grueling, hyper-capitalist material labor of 2023, the cold, paranoid structural authority of 2024, and the terrifying, fiery ego death of 2025.
The smoke finally clears.
The smoke finally entirely
The
clears.
difficult-to-approach distance of the Emperor is just completely gone.
Evaporated. The sun is the exact opposite of distant. The sun's light cannot be hidden behind fortress walls, and crucially, it doesn't discriminate. It shines equally on the powerful and the powerless.
That's beautiful.
The source explains that in 2026, the Ziwei star will finally appear in a completely public, transparent, and overwhelmingly positive way. All the gloom, the systemic confusion, and the chaotic smoke of the previous years will completely dissipate.
So they're finally seen for who they are.
Yeah, the world will finally see this figure clearly. They will intuitively understand their philosophy without the need for force, and they will feel the genuine warmth of the new era they've spent half a decade secretly building.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this, you might be wondering, why does this highly specific, esoteric timeline matter to my actual life?
It's a fair question.
I think it matters because it fundamentally shifts how we are taught to view historical turning points. We are conditioned to think of profound world changes as these spontaneous overnight miracles. We just wait around for someone to show up and fix things.
We want to be rescued.
Right. But this reading suggests something deeply fundamentally different about the mechanics of change. It tells us that what looks to the public like an overnight revelation is actually just the final visible step of a grueling years-long journey. It's the end result of unseen psychological breakdowns, practical resource gathering, secretive structural planning, and a painful, fiery personal transformation.
It really demands that we look much deeper at the actual architecture of systemic change. I mean, if society just sits around passively waiting for the sun to magically appear in the sky to save us from our problems, we are entirely missing the point of the prophecy. The sun only rises, the new era only begins, after the groundwork has been meticulously, ruthlessly laid, and the necessary painful sacrifices have been made by those willing to do the heavy lifting in the dark.
It's a stark reminder that true emergence is earned through fire, not just granted by the cosmos.
To briefly trace the causal chain of this incredible chronological journey we've just mapped out, we started in the shock of 2022, where the mental stalemate was violently broken and the blindfold of delusion was ripped away.
Yeah.
That realization forced the pragmatism of 2023, the year of quiet bottom building, gathering the massive material resources and capital necessary for survival. 2024 saw the secret coronation, the establishment of the emperor's hidden structural authority over the underlying systems.
Then the ship burns.
Then comes the crucible of 2025, the terrifying Viking funeral ship where the rigid old self, the secrecy, and the ego must be intentionally burned away. All of this relentless causality leads to 2026, the radiant, fully public emergence symbolized by the sun, bringing unobscured truth and a new systemic hope to the world.
It is a genuinely stunning narrative arc. And it leaves us with something really profound to chew on. We spend this entire time talking about the sage's grueling journey, their secret preparation, and their necessary trial by fire.
Uh,
The source makes it explicitly clear that 2025 requires that Viking funeral to burn away their old self before the world can be bathed in the light of the sun. But here is a thought I want to leave you with. If this 5-year prophecy is indeed playing out right now, and 2026 truly is the year, the sun finally steps out into the unobscured light, what happens to the rest of us?
that's the real question.
We are a global society that has spent the last several years completely adapting our eyes to the dark, to the smoke, and to the shadows. If this figure finally emerges, are we actually ready to be led by someone who has survived that kind of transformative fire? Or will the brightness of that absolute truth be too blinding for a world that has grown comfortable in the dark? What parts of our own current global society, our own old selves, are quietly catching fire right now to make room for this new era?
I think we're going to find out very soon.
Keep your eyes peeled for those signal fires in the year ahead, and ask yourself if you're ready for the smoke to clear. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.